Okay, so welcome to Storytime, Newcastle Storytime, in support of the Newcastle Mental Health Support Group.
Not that there's anybody from there here.
That's all right. Okay, and we acknowledge the traditional owners who are
Warramai Awabikal.
Warramai Awabikal. Is that correct?
Correct, yes it is.
Okay.
So they're two different ones.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got Nathan is our guest speaker today. He's published a new book. He's spoken here before. I've actually read his books and they're super, really, really interesting and well written. Very engaging page turners and nice and short, so very enjoyable to read it. So Nathan's well known as a street performer and street author and artist and so on. So it's great that he can come along and tell us another story about his new book. Okay, thanks Nathan.
Yay! Woo!
Hey guys, nice to be among you all again. You all know me here anyway, except the two new girls that they've just met me. But I've released a new book now. I've released A Lonely Man, so I'll just talk a bit about A Lonely Man briefly and then I'll read some of the story. So this book is not one of my fictional memoirs. It's not exclusively based off events in my life. Many of the things in this one didn't happen to me or my family. For instance, the character's mother in this is a heroin addict and my mother is not a heroin addict. So when you read this, if you get the chance, it's not all based off my experience, but some of it is, particularly the stuff around the buildings that the character lives in, the rough housing buildings. I've lived in those rough buildings, which can be quite difficult, and some of the story addresses things I've experienced in the buildings I've lived in. Now the story is about isolation and loneliness first, because I wanted to draw attention to the fact that many Australians live very isolated lives and many people around the world live many very isolated lives. After being about isolation and loneliness, the story is about mental health and drug dependency. The character is an alcoholic and he has severe schizoaffective disorder. You see throughout the story that he experiences regular paranoid thoughts and delusions about people being secret agents and stuff. And so he finds that very difficult to live with. Now, the story is really about the NDIS because at the start of the story we meet a very depressed, lonely man in his apartment, drinking and smoking a cigarette. But it's the day he's meant to have his first meeting with his first support worker from an NDIS service since receiving NDIS funding. So he manages to drag himself out of bed and then he heads off down the street to meet with the support worker. And the story follows their journey on their first support session as the support worker tries to encourage him, lift his spirits and guide him onto the right path. So that's all I'll say about that. The bond grows and they grow stronger, and he doesn't trust him at first, but he comes to trust him towards the end. So yes, but it is a sad story, so you should know it is a sad story and it doesn't have a positive ending, which is very sad. But I wanted to talk about real life things, and sometimes life is sad. But it certainly paints the NDIS in a good light and shows how social services and government services can help people to improve their lives, can engage people in our community who feel outcast and ostracised, and can lift people up through support. So that was one thing I was trying to show with the story. Right, so that's a few things about the story. Now I'll read some of the story, and some of it is quite rough, but that's okay. There's a bit of swearing. Should I censor that? I'll try and...
No, just say it.
Yeah, okay. Well, first I'll read the dedication. Here's the dedication. This story is dedicated to isolated people who have no companionship in life. It is written for those individuals who have not known love, who do not have family and friends, and who will die alone. Well, those people are out there and we have to think about them because they're the forgotten people, and we need services to support bringing those people back into the community in a meaningful way. So here we go, A Lonely Man. It was a Friday morning in the suburb of Hamilton, Newcastle, Australia, and a lonely man was sitting on a worn lounge in a small one-room apartment. His scruffy brown hair hung over saddened eyes and a patchy beard protruded out in all directions from his pointed chin. The man was smoking a cigarette and holding a long neck of beer in his hand. As he sat, he puffed on the smoke, then took a swig of the drink. He was watching the morning talk show on the television. A popular musician was being interviewed on the program about his latest tour. The hosts were laughing and smiling as the star entertained them with his antics. The expression on the lonely man's face was unhappy as he listened to the rock star joke around with the presenters. Scowling, he took another swig of the drink and then puffed on his smoke again. As he breathed in, he started to cough and mucus flew from his mouth onto the floor. The man ignored it, focusing on the star. He felt angry seeing how happy he was. He wondered what the star would think of him if they ever met. Would they look down on him and see him as pathetic? The man grunted, then reached for the remote and turned the show off. As the television fell silent, he heard a thud-thud at his door. The banging made him remember when one of his neighbours had assaulted him months ago. They had come banging at the door demanding a smoke. He had told the neighbour he didn't have any, but they just called him a liar and continued shouting at him to give them a smoke. He had told him once more that he didn't have any, then the neighbour had started punching him. The lonely man knew he wasn't going to answer his door ever again. "I can hear you in there," came a voice suddenly, and he knew it was the same neighbour, the man from number 12. He had reported the incident to the landlord and police, but number 12 hadn't been evicted, and he was regularly aggressive, demanding money and smokes. "Answer the door, you jerk, I want a smoke." The lonely man sat silently in his lounge, trying not to make any noise, and waited for number 12 to leave. "If I find you're in there later, I'll kick the door in and bash you, you piece of crap," he heard. "You're a weakling," then footsteps marching down the hall. As he heard number 12's door slam down the hall, the lonely man puffed and panted with anxiety. He hated living in this building because it was a dangerous environment. There were so many violent offenders in his block of flats that he never felt safe. The man sat for a few more minutes trying to stay silent, and then once he was sure number 12 wasn't coming back, he started to move around in his seat. He looked around his bedsit apartment. On the ground he saw empty takeaway containers and cigarette packets scattered around. He wondered if he should clean them up. He was worried about germs and bacteria, and some of the containers had mould in them. The man considered doing it today, but decided he felt too miserable to bother. As he studied the mess on the floor, the lonely man thought about all the perfect people he saw in the street every day. He wished he could be like them, but he felt so dead inside most days that he struggled to move. Looking across the room, he stared at the guitar that sat in the corner. As a teen, he had dreamed of touring the world performing his punk songs. He had all sorts of ideas for wild music videos and stunts he could do on stage. He wanted to write hits and win awards, but none of that ever happened. He had loved music when he was young. That was when he felt alive. He was the guitarist in a band briefly in high school, but he had an argument with the other members. Staring into space, he remembered when he would write a new song every day. He hadn't written a song in years and rarely played the instrument anymore. Right, that's as much as I'll read of the story. Thanks, guys. So, as I said, I think this is an important story because I know I've been isolated at times in my life where I've gone years without much social interaction and where I haven't had close friends or relationships. And that was a terrible period of my life, and many people live through that for the duration of their life. So I'm trying to bring awareness to those isolated, forgotten people because they're out there and we need to support them to engage with the community. Now, my books are all over there as usual every time I come, and I've got my card reader. So if you want to buy a book, my short stories are $15, and I've also got my gift cards, which are $6 each. Thanks, guys.